Hey guys, my name's Dave. This is Customspraymods, and in this video, I'm going to be painting the STI. So when I bought this car, the internals were good. It had a rebuilt motor, driveline was good, had upgraded suspension, downpipe, exhaust. It was amazing. But the bodywork was in pretty poor condition. Basically, there were stone chips, scratches, swirls all over the car, heavy dents everywhere. I found about 22 dents on the car. So yeah, I wanted to fix that up and get it looking amazing. Now, I've already painted the bonnet and the roof and the front bumper bar. I've got those videos, you can check them out. But now I'm just going to focus on the rest of the car, so the sides and the back. And I'll show you how to do that right now. Check it out. Before we get started, I just want to say thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed already, hit the subscribe button and the bell will notify you when a video comes out. Yeah, I've got a whole heap of tutorials and information about spray painting that can definitely help you in your work at home. So if you're in Australia and you need some automotive paint products, check out vgautopaints.com.au. Everything I use is from VG's, and yeah, they got all the best stuff. So yeah, check them out. If you use the discount code CSM, you'll get a mad discount, and it's just going to help me make more videos. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, we're going to start by taking the car apart. So I'm going to jack it up and pull the wheels off. Also going to remove the rocker panels from both sides, the little wing on the top of the window, and also the door handles. We've removed the door trims and also the window trims that go on top of the doors. I'm going to remove the revision mirrors as well, and this was one of the hardest screws on the whole car to undo. Now I'm just going to mask up all these open areas and give the car a really good wash. I'm washing underneath, the sides, basically giving the car a thorough wash because any of that dirt can interfere with the painting process. Now that the car's washed and dried, I'm going to remove all the clips and molds that go around the body of the car. Anything that's just going to make it harder to paint. Now as you can see, there's a lot of dirt and grime under these molds, and removing these is a huge benefit because it means you can clean out all that grime and dirt. Now we're going to remove the boot lid. We're also going to take off the wing. Now someone had painted that wing before and attached it back with urethane. It was super hard to get off. We had to shove rulers and knives in there, so we were pretty happy when we finally got it off. Now we're just going to continue to remove parts off the car. The rear taillights, the rear bumper bar, the petrol flap. Doing all this is just going to make it a lot easier to get a really nice paint job. Now it's time to start preparing this boot lid, and as you can see, that dried up urethane can be really difficult to get off. Unless you're using one of these, it's a clean and strip disc. Definitely makes the job a lot easier. I'm also going to remove the badges and everything like that, then I can start preparing it for paint. So I'm going to spray all the metal parts of the car with a polyester primer, including this boot lid. So to prepare for that, I'm going to sand with 180 grit sandpaper and this dual action air sander. Anytime I come across a scratch or a stone chip, I'm just going to sand it out till it's completely smooth. Then when I spray the primer, it will fill it up and get it even better. I'm also going to sand by hand all the edges with 240 grit sandpaper and a block. Just all the parts I couldn't reach with the air sander. Now it's time to mask up the car, but first I'm going to clean it with wax and grease remover. That's just going to get rid of all the dust and help the tape stick better. So this would be considered a closed door respray, which means I'm only painting the outside of the car. The doors are going to be closed. So I'm just going to mask up as much as I can to make sure I don't get paint or primer on the areas that I don't want to. Now it's time for the polyester primer. It's all sanded and ready to go. Before I spray the primer, I'm going to clean with acetone. Now we don't want to use wax and grease remover with the polyester primer because that can leave a residue and inhibit the adhesion process. So we've used acetone, now we're ready to go. Okay, for this job I'm going to use the Resto Finish Poly Primer. It's a great polyester primer, just make sure you give it a good stir because it does settle to the bottom. Now I'm going to mix it up with the hardener and put it in my 1.8mm spray gun. So this is young Michael and he lives down the road from me. When he found out I was painting the Rexy, he insisted on coming down to give me a hand. Now he's been helping me remove panels and sand all the parts, so I thought I'd give him a go of spraying the primer. And here he goes, he's got his mask on and he's painting the primer now. Now I'm going to paint the rest of the car using the polyester primer. I'm going to give it 3 coats, waiting 10 minutes between coats. Now the benefit of the polyester primer is it goes directly to the paint, it goes directly to metal, it has a really high build, and it can also fill any minor imperfections like from sanded stone chips or scratches. This primer also has a benefit because it dries extremely hard, harder than other primers, so you know you're not going to have any problems in the future. Now I know that this car has dents all over it, so before I address them, I've painted the primer just to seal off the paint and make sure I've got a good barrier between the paint and any body filler I need to apply. Once I sand the primer, it's going to expose any dents that I have. Now it's time to work on all the other extra parts, and because the paint is in quite bad condition on these parts, I'm going to just sand them with 240 grit and spray a primer. Now because they're plastic and fiberglass, I'm just going to spray an adhesion promoter first, and that's going to help the primer stick even better than it should. Basically, you just need 1 or 2 coats of adhesion promoter and then it's time to apply the primer. And here goes Mikey again spraying the adhesion promoter. I think he's having a good time because he seems to be enjoying himself. Now I'm going to spray a Concept MS100 2K primer. It's basically a primer surfacer, which means it doesn't have much build to it, so it's just going to make it easier to sand. I'm going to mix it 4:1 with hardener, then I'm going to put a little bit of thinners in there just to make it even smoother. So now I'm going to put it in a 1.8mm spray gun. And if you've noticed this product I'm using, it's called a PPS cup and a PPS adapter. It goes on the gun and it just makes it a lot easier to use the gun and clean it up. So the primer surfacer over these parts is quite easy. Basically, just spray 2 coats, wait 10 minutes between coats, then once it's dry, I can start sanding it. Now that the primer's all dry, I'm going to spray it with a guide coat, which is basically just a black paint. Then I'm going to sand it all with 240 grit and a block. That's just going to get it nice and straight. Now as you can see, I'm using quite a long block. Now this is going to follow the good parts of the panel and expose any dents. Basically, any parts of the car that still have guide coat on it are low spots, and they need to be fixed later. Now that I've done my initial sand with 240 grit, I've found a whole heap of low spots over the car. Now all these need to be filled, and I'm going to use body filler to fill them up. And before I apply body filler, I need to sand with 150 grit sandpaper so that it can stick a lot better. Now all those low spots are sanded, I'm cleaning with wax and grease remover. I'll dry it off, now I'm going to apply my filler. I'm using the U-Pole Easy 3 Fine Filler. Basically, these dents aren't that big, so the fine filler is going to do the job just right. This is a 2K filler, which means it needs a hardener. Once the hardener is applied and mixed, it's going to start going off. That means I've got to get it on the dents and smoothed out before it gets too hard. Now when applying body filler, I like to dump on a whole heap of it and then use a large applicator to pull it down and skim off the top of that filler. Basically, using the good parts of the panel to shape it. Now the benefit of doing this just makes it a bit easier to sand that filler. Now that the body filler is all applied and dry, I'm going to sand it with a block and 80 grit sandpaper. So because we're going to apply more primer, I'm going to sand the dents again with 150 grit and then 240 grit. Finally, we'll put more primer and then we'll be ready to sand it again. So we've cleaned the car again with acetone, mix up the primer, put it in our 1.8mm spray gun, and now I'm only going to spray the primer over those dented areas where the body filler was. I'm going to spray 3 coats of primer, and once that dries, I can start blocking it back with 240 grit sandpaper. So the new primer has been sprayed, I've sprayed on the guide coat, and now I basically just need to sand those areas again with 240 grit, and this is going to get it nice and smooth. So the car is all sanded and it's nice and straight with no more dents. I'm going to spray it again with guide coat and then I'm going to sand it with an air sander and 320 grit sandpaper. This is just going to get out all the 240 grit scratches and make it even more smooth. So I do need to sand all this one more time before I spray the base coat. Now before I do my final sand, I'm going to use a 3M dry guide coat powder. Now this is so fine that it's going to go into any deep scratches. And this is just going to help me pick up any scratches that I might have put in there from the previous sandpapers. It's just going to make sure that it's nice and smooth, because if those deep scratches are left there, then the base coat will expose them and get a scratchy looking paint. So the 3M dry guide coat system is really good for that final sand. Now to keep things uniform, I'm going to use a 1K high build primer in a spray can, just to cover all those areas that have rubbed through. Now this happens when you're sanding primer. Sometimes on edges and high spots, you tend to rub through the primer and exposes the original paint. Now I've sprayed that primer, I'm going to sand it with a fine sanding sponge just to smooth it out from any dryness that was caused by the spray can. So I'm finally ready to spray the base coat. Now before we do that, I'm going to take off all the tape and masking off the car and basically put it all on again so that it's nice and fresh. We want to get rid of that old plastic because we don't want any dust and residue from that primer getting into our paint.
Okay, I'm all ready to paint. Now I've got everything sanded, masked up. All I have to do is clean it with wax and grease remover. Now I've got here a bit of a list of which way I'm going to paint. So I'm going to start with the boot lid, then I'm going to do the rear lights, the fuel flap, the roof, then I'm going to do the engine bay, then go through the front guard, roof rail, do the sides, then do the left hand side as well. So yeah, it's good to have a list. Here's my list of what I'm doing, just so you know you're not mucking around when you've got the gun in your hand. You know exactly where you're going to go and how you're going to paint the job. So yeah, I've got that all ready to go. It's looking good. Yeah, she's all primed, repaired. I've cleaned the booth, I've put new filters in. Now if you're lucky to have a booth, then yeah, that's great. But no, I just need to do clean with wax and grease remover, ready to paint.
So after days and weeks of preparing the car, sanding it and filling it, sanding it again, I'm finally ready to paint. I've cleaned it with wax and grease remover. Now I'm going to get into my safety gear and I can start spraying the base coat. It's been a long journey to get to this point, so I'm pretty happy. So I've gone and got my base coat. It's all mixed up to the paint coat. Now this particular base coat gets mixed 2-to-1 with base coat reducer. Now I've done that and I'm putting it in my pot. I'm using a 1.2mm spray gun, and as you can see, these pots are great because they've got a filter built into the lid to stop any extra hard bits getting into the paint and on the job. I've gone around and cleaned the parts with a tack rag. Now I'm ready to spray the base coat. I'm going to spray 4 coats of base coat, waiting 10 minutes between coats. And I'm painting all the hard to reach areas first, like under the guards, under the doors, and then I'll spray the large areas last. This is just to get an even finish, even coat over the panels. The base coat is really fun and really easy to spray, but it's important to keep an even distance away from the panels. If you go too close, you can get a bunching up of pearl, and that will show up in your top finish. So the base coat is all done and looking great. Now it's time to put the clear coat on. I'm using a HS Pro 2K Clear. Now this is a HS, which means high solid, and pretty much 1 coat of this is equal to about 1.5 coats of an MS Clear. It's going to be a nice and thick, nice and glossy. It's going to give me a lot of product to rub and buff if I need to. Now I've got the clear coat in a 1.3mm spray gun, and I'm using about 30 psi. I'm going to spray 3 coats of clear, waiting 10 minutes between coats. Now it's important to get a nice and even finish and try not to overlap too much. If you overlap too much, it can cause runs and drips in the paint. When it comes to painting clear, it's important to get it nice and even and smooth, and there's a fine line between having the gun too far away and too close, going too slow or too fast. Also, temperature can affect the clear, and humidity, so it's a very hard process, and if you get it right, it's always a miracle. Now that the car's all painted and dry, I've moved it out and I've brought in all the other bits. I'm painting the door handles, the rocker panels, front bonnet scoop, and the rear spoiler. I'm doing the exact same thing, painting 4 coats of base coat and 3 coats of 2K Clear. So I've let the clear dry for about a week, and I'm going to start sanding out all the dust that's landed in the clear. I'm using this 1500 grit toll cut paper with a sticky back, and I've got it on a small block. I'm just going to go around and sand all the little bits of dust. Basically, you can feel them with your hand, but you can also see it once you sand it. On some of the parts, I'm using this 3-inch air sander to get the dust out. I've gone over it with 2000 grit sandpaper. Now I'm going to go over all the sanding with 3000 grit sandpaper and water. This is just going to get out all the 2000 grit scratches and make it a bit easier for me to machine polish all those scratches out. Now I'm going to use the 3D 510 compound, a firm pad on a rotary machine, and just machine polish all those areas that I sanded with the 3000 grit. Basically, this takes a bit of time and it can be difficult to pick up all those scratches. You just need to persevere and go over a few times to make sure you've got all those scratches out with that initial polish. Now that I've sanded all the dust out, I've machine polished it all with my step 1 firm pad and coarse compound. I'm going to remove all the masking and plastic, and then I'm going to start assembling the car again. Once it's all assembled, I'll give it another polish with a medium pad and a softer compound, just in case I make any scratches or scuffs when I'm installing all the parts. So I've finally got the car back together, and now I'm going to start polishing it with the medium pad, and I'm going to use a 3D1 one-step compound. Basically, just go over all the areas that I polished just to get out any swells from the rotary machine. Now I'm going to use a softer pad and a finer compound, and this is just going to give a finer cut and make the black paint look really nice and shiny and glossy. I've also got my little machine. I'm going to go around all the little intricate areas just to make sure there's no scratches or swirls on the car. So the plan for the STI is to apply a ceramic coating. Now before I apply a ceramic coating, I need to clean the car with an eraser or an alcohol-based cleaner. Eraser is a water-based cleaner, and basically it's just going to remove any residue from the machine polishing that may inhibit the adhesion of the ceramic coating. Now the coating I'm going to use on the car is the Osrin Coats. It's a Japanese coating, it dries super hard, super glossy, and you get up to 5 years protection with it. So I'm going to apply that to the car, basically wipe it on with the applicator and then buff it off. I'm going to use 2 microfiber cloths, one to buff off first, then I'm going to use a new one to buff off any residue or haze and make sure that it's fully, thoroughly wiped off. The most important part when applying ceramic coating is to make sure it's all buffed off properly. If you leave any residue or haze on the car, it can dry that way and it can be very difficult to remove. It can also look pretty horrible on the car, so buffing it all off is important to make sure you do that really thoroughly.
You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me high and dry. Baby,
Well, there you go. The STI is all painted and coated. It's looking amazing. It's absolutely popping. I'm super happy with the result. Basically, it's been months in the making, and it was always a bit sketchy when you pull apart a car that you're not going to get it back together the right way, but I'm super happy and I think it's looking amazing. So yeah, next I think I'm going to tint the wheels a bit and make them pop a little bit more. Maybe just put a bit of a gold tint on top. So yeah, that'll be a new video on that coming soon. Otherwise, we've got a new project car that we're going to be working on. I'm going to ceramic coat that, which is pretty cool. Other than that, check out my Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and like and share the video. Thanks for watching.